Hi, friends. So, in a new study released Monday, May 4th, says that in 2020 says 2 to 3.5 billion people in 50 years will be living in a climate that historically has proven too hot to handle. In just 50 years, 2 billion to 3.5 billion people, mostly the poor who cannot afford air conditioning, will be living in a climate that historically has been too hot to handle, as the new study says. With every 1.8 degree increase in global average annual temperature from man-made climate change, about 1 billion or so people will end up in areas too warm, day in, day out, to be habitable without cooling technology, according to ecologist Martin Schaefer of Wageningen University in the Netherlands, co-author of the study. How many people end up at risk depends on how much heat trapping, carbon dioxide emissions are reduced, and how fast the world population grows. Under the worst-case scenario for population growth and for carbon pollution, which many climate scientists say is looking less likely these days, the study in Monday's journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences predicts about 3.5 billion people will live in extremely hot areas. That's a third of the projected 2070 population. But even scenarios considered more likely and less severe project that in 50 years a couple of billion people will be living in places too hot without air conditioning, the study said. So there's a few problems there, obviously, and this is kind of very not surprising that this is the case. I really don't know what to actually say about that, really. So it says, as the world gets more crowded and warmer, the study concluded large swathes of Africa, Asia, South America, and Australia will likely be in this same temperature range. Well over 1 billion people and up to 3.5 billion people will be affected depending on the climate-altering choices humanity makes over the next half-century, according to lead author Qi Zhu of Nanjing University in China. There's another new study too, which is on May the 8th. According to a new study, the study identifies thousands of previously rare, unprecedented bouts of extreme heat and humidity in Asia, Africa, Australia, South America, and North America, including the US Gulf Coast region. Along the Persian Gulf, researchers spotted more than a dozen recent brief outbreaks surpassing the theoretical human survivability limit. The outbreaks have so far been confined to localized areas and lasted just a few hours, but they are increasing in frequency and intensity, says the author. The study appears this week in the journal Science Advances. Previous studies projected that this would happen several decades from now, but this shows it's happening right now. They're talking about, extreme heat and humidity, said the author Colin Raymond, who did the research as a PhD student at Columbia's University Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. Quote, the times these events last will increase and the areas they affect will grow in direct correlation with global warming, end quote. It says humidity worsens the effects of heat because humans cool their bodies by sweating. Water expelled through the skin removes excess body heat, and when it evaporates, it carries the heat away. The process works nicely in deserts, but less well in humid regions where the air is already too laden with moisture to take on much more. Evaporation of sweat slows. In the most extreme instances, it could stop. In this case, unless one can retreat to an air-conditioned room, the body's core heats beyond its narrow survivable range, and organs begin to fail. Even a strong, physically fit person resting in the shade with no clothes and unlimited access to drinking water would die within hours. So they say, even the strongest, best adapted people cannot carry out normal outdoor activities when the wet bulb hits 32 Celsius, equivalent to the heat index of 132 Fahrenheit. And most others would crumble before that. And Stephen Sherwood, a climatologist at the Australia's University of New South Wales, said, quote, these measurements imply that some areas of Earth are much closer than expected to attaining sustained intolerable heat. It was previously believed we had a much larger margin of safety, end quote. So that was in the phys.org. That was called Potentially Fatal Combinations of Humidity and Heat Are Emerging Across the Globe. That was May 8th, from the Earth Institute at Columbia University. and the one before that was billions projected to suffer nearly unlivable heat in 2070. That's May 4th, 2020 by Seth Borenstein. So we don't really have to, here in Australia, it's pretty clear to us that, I'm living in Tasmania, which has a lower than average, lower than usual temperatures compared to the rest of Australia. Summer is, we get about, say, 8 or 9 hot days, and they can be very hot days, and then the rest of the time it's sort of around the early 20s Celsius. And but on the actual mainland here in Australia, it's like last year, it was crazy. The temperatures, particularly in New South Wales, were sort of always above 30, and oftentimes they would be not only the late 30s, but they'd be the early 40s, sometimes the mid 40s Celsius. And that's just not tenable for humans. And of course, that doesn't even, most of all these things don't even take into account animal agriculture, the animals that are just out in these pastures baking with no trees anywhere in sight. I often think of that. Anytime there's a hot day, I think about these animals that wouldn't be there in these pastures if we were vegan, if we weren't creating demand for these animal products, meat, dairy, eggs, etc. And I often think of these animals that are just stuck out there day in and day out. The only time they get some respite is at nighttime, and even then it can be very hot. And there's no trees, no nothing for them to shelter under. Not that makes a whole lot of difference when you've got, temperatures that are sort of in the mid 30s, even on days here in Tasmania, because it's coolish, the weather, particularly this time of year, when there's a hot day, like, say, for example, even if it's, say, 26 degrees Celsius, which isn't, compared to the rest of Australia, wouldn't be considered very hot. But you'll see animals going and laying underneath what, if they're lucky enough to have a tree, they will all be congregating underneath that tree. As many as possibly can get underneath that tree. So even in that 25, 26 degrees Celsius, animals want shade just like we do. So it's like, that isn't even taken into account. Then you've got the wildlife, in quotes, that have to endure that. And then of course you get the crazy bushfires that we've had here in Australia. Just really nutty, bonkers bushfires. Last year was just appalling, and I'm sure that New South Wales is bracing for another one next year. And we had last year here in Tasmania, across the river, we had sort of 180,000 hectares of forest just went up. And it was frightening, because we thought it was going to jump across the river, and sort of embers and all of that. We could see it on the hills in the distance. And I did a few videos from January 2019 about that, and the air was just filled with smoke. So that's the new normal for Australia. Even in Tasmania, which is cooler than the mainland, we had fires like that. So we're already on the front lines of this, where the heat and humidity will become unbearable. And I imagine there will be cities in Australia and also rural towns on New South Wales, and there are places that are already really crazy hot anyway, just as a normal, because Australia's a dry continent. But I envisage that there will be places that it's unlivable at some point, and not in the distant future, probably in the next few years. They won't be livable, and people are going to have to find some, I don't know if we're going to have to all become mole people, There are towns, like there's a town, I think it's in South Australia, where people live underground. It's always been very hot, and South Australia has, their temperatures are just off the charts. And you can see that it's just going to be like that. That's the new normal. So, there's places like Saudi Arabia and Southeast Asia. I grew up in Brisbane, and Brisbane, it never used to be as hot as it is now. And I don't live there anymore, but, when I was growing up, it would get hot, but you'd always have these thunderstorms in the afternoon. And then I noticed in the 90s, those thunderstorms became very rare. And then it became this really, like, where the sun felt like it was burning on your skin. you could feel it sort of, it almost felt like by the time I left in early 2000s, 2007 I left, I left Queensland, I felt like, you almost needed a radiation suit. And people who would say, oh, I love summer, I love the heat, they would be spending all their time indoors in air-conditioned places. They'd just go from one air-conditioned place to the next, which always made me laugh because they'd kind of tone down, like if a day was really hot, they'd say, oh, it's a little warm today. I mean, no, it's really, really hot, and everybody doesn't want to go outside. So you'd have these like resort towns like the Gold Coast, where everybody sort of, goes there because of the, the weather and the beach. There's that saying, mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. I mean, it's the center for, melanoma, skin melanoma. You can be, and then you've got all the stuff that you put on your skin, which is not great for your skin and your system, but it's certainly not good for the oceans. And there's gallons and thousands of gallons of that washing into the ocean. And it doesn't really protect you for very long. So those people that are swimming, if they're not paying attention, they're a melanoma candidate here in Australia. I mean, there's so many things, and I haven't even gone into the animal agriculture contribution to this heat thing, because we're wiping out forests, ending topsoil, which takes a long time to develop, draining water resources with animal agriculture, and it's a driver of the sixth mass extinction, according to that study that I always mention. The largest study to date, 114 countries, 40,000 farms, 90% of all we eat from farm to fork. And the solution they came up with how what we could do is to go vegan, to eat a plant-based diet. There's more to veganism than just eating a plant-based diet, but let's just go with that at the moment. Adopting a plant-based diet, not eating meat, dairy, eggs, etc. That was what they suggested to address the single most important thing you could do to address the climate crisis. And it also addresses world hunger, and I speak about that often. But I'm not going to get into that, but just check out the Dr. Joseph Paws study online. It's a UK study. And all this heat then just sparks off all the positive feedback loops, of melting ice. And the melting ice, of course, underneath the ice is permafrost, is methane. Underneath the permafrost is methane, and there's lots of methane now coming up from the oceans and also from under the East Siberian Arctic shelf. And what will that do? That will increase the warming, because that goes into the atmosphere, and it's a much stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And that will create more feedback loops, and that's where we're at now, the runaway global warming. I know people don't like to hear that, but that's what it is. It's runaway at the present time, and that's not going to change now. There's no real happy note to end on here. I'm actually going to talk with someone about the movie Planet of the Humans, which Michael Moore did. Michael Moore helped produce it. It wasn't his film, but he produces it and produced it, and he still stands by it. There's problems with that movie, but there's also some points in it about that we're going to talk about later on. Maybe even I'll post it tomorrow. We might do it tonight. It's not happy news, this. I don't follow a lot of this anymore because I know how it's going, and I'm sure you do too. If you watch this channel, you've probably seen enough of my videos to know where I stand on this, and I don't believe in the whole hopium thing. I think you can't make informed decisions and choices if you aren't given the facts, and you don't get the facts from conservative groups like the International Panel on Climate Change. You don't get, that's a conservative group, and so they've taken a long time to actually state anything that's close to how bad it is. While you're here, I invite you to watch a couple of an old documentary, Cowspiracy. It's a few years old now, but that still holds true. Cowspiracy, The Sustainability Secret, and also check out Seaspiracy on Instagram to see what we're doing to the oceans and how that is also contributing to climate change. Not to mention, of course, most importantly, destroying the sentient life of animals in the ocean, that their home. That's what we're doing to their home. I just wanted to share that report because that's the sort of thing I've been expecting to hear, because you can already see it right now, the untenable heat ranges that are not only in Australia, but you can see them in Asia and in North America. Anybody who's already has a sort of a hot kind of a climate, and if humidity is thrown into that mix, then that can be deadly, and it is deadly. And the reason I mention Brisbane is because it used to get quite humid, and I'm sure that it still gets like that too, but now with the increase in temperatures, I can't imagine that it's much fun at all to be there. And but when I passed through Kuala Lumpur on my way back in January from India, this is January 23 years ago, it was very, very hot at that time. I think it was possibly even the middle of summer, and I remember I was staying at this hostel, and the humidity was so thick in the air that it felt like you were in a sauna. Basically, it was so thick, it felt like it just was awful. I'd just gotten over an illness that I'd gotten in India. I was there for a little while, and I picked up an illness, and it wasn't anything bad, but it was enough to make me feel quite sick at the time, upper respiratory tract infection. So I wasn't feeling that great and then I get into this hostel, and it was just so hot. And I remember all I wanted to do was just lay down. And so I got this room which had a large fan, and I just lay down on the bed with the fan on and just went to sleep, because it was one of those things where I didn't want to have to cope with walking around. Fortunately, it was only an overnight stay because I had to catch another plane back to Australia, but that was enough for me. And I just think, God, I can't imagine anything hotter than that. But that actually wasn't that hot for there, really. Like it was just because the humidity was so high, sorry. And I think it was probably only, 32 or something degrees Celsius. But with the humidity being so high, it just was, I found it unbearable. But I'm not really one for living in hot places. That's why I live here. And I don't know how long it's going to be like that here. I mean, as time goes by. And I've noticed, I'm almost 60 now, and I've noticed in the years since from 1960 when I was born, where there was only 10 million people living in Australia, and now there's 25 million, where the population is increasing, so we're everywhere. So we're all putting out, we're all using, particularly in the West, we're consuming a lot, and so we're creating more and more greenhouse gases. I've noticed over these 60 years, the change in the climate. I've noticed how there's much less rain than there was in the 60s and 70s. There used to be a lot more rain. The sun seems to be so much sort of bitier on the skin. There's a lot more skin cancer. This is just in Australia. There's it's unreliable weather patterns. So, we have water shortages and droughts, prolonged droughts. The droughts have just been getting more and more frequent, more and more prolonged. Will they give up animal agriculture here? No, they won't. But why won't they? Because we're not vegan. I mean, this is the thing. You've got animal agriculture, which is a violent industry. It's awful and violent towards sentient animals. And then you've got all the things that contribute to the climate crisis are stemming from that. It's a major contributor to the climate crisis. That's something Michael Moore barely mentioned in that, or those people in Planet of the Humans barely even nodded to. I don't think they did even. I know it was about sort of the green industry, but the green environmental groups is that they never ever mention veganism because it's inconvenient and they want people to donate to them. So they don't want to challenge their donors. They don't want to challenge the public. So they don't mention veganism. In fact, some of them take money, according to Cowspiracy, the sustainability secret, some of them take money from the animal agriculture industry. And I don't know why anybody always tends to tip their hat to Bill McKibben all the time, because he actually promotes animal agriculture and he ignores veganism. Extinction Rebellion ignores veganism and calls it a personal choice. Really? Is it a personal choice if it's a major contributor to the climate crisis? Yes, everything is a personal choice. Driving cars is a personal choice. Eating animal products is a personal choice. But that's where we have to all get together and act on things. Everything is a personal choice. Everything is a personal choice. Capitalism all the drivers of capitalism, we're the drivers of consumption. So, it's not like some mythical capitalist creature that's destroying the planet. We're all consuming. And I know that there are many people in power who are just letting corporations do whatever the hell they want, like Donald Trump is basically undoing all the environmental protections. And corporations just think, great. And they're literally able to dump toxins into the water supply now. He's released any obligations to look after any of the small environmental protections. He's just let them go, and now corporations can, while this COVID thing is on, they can dump whatever they want, basically. Extinction Rebellion, as far as I'm concerned, I think nonviolent civil disobedience is very important, but I write them off because they literally are holding hands now with small animal agriculture businesses and helping promote small animal agriculture. Here's a news flash for anybody in Extinction Rebellion. The population cannot be sustained on animal agriculture. By 2050, animal agriculture will not be able to supply food, if you can call rotting flesh and secretions food. They will not be able to supply the planet. Look up the looming food crisis with Chris Hedges.
By 2050, the world's population is expected to reach nearly 9.8 billion. Most of this increase will occur in the global south. To feed a population of this size, we will have to produce more food in the next 40 years than was consumed in the last 10,000 years. If we continue to rely on the animal agriculture industry to feed us, the planetary food supply will soon suffer severe shortages, leading to massive hunger, malnutrition, starvation, and widespread unrest. Industrial animal agriculture already occupies more than half of the world's arable land and resources. It consumes most of our water. It expels more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire transportation sector. It is polluting and often poisoning the water, soil, and air, and deforesting the planet, as well as causing species extinction. The clash between overpopulation and a species reliant on the animal agriculture industry is a recipe for global catastrophe.
So let go or be dragged. The fact is, animal agriculture is destroying the planet. It's contributing to world hunger and all of that. I've mentioned this many times before. And most importantly, it's destroying the lives of sentient animals, 1 to 3 trillion every year. 1 to 3 trillion. Every 4 days, there's more animals killed than all the humans that have died from murder and genocide and plagues and everything in 4 days. This is how many animals are killed every 4 days. More than all the humans killed in all those different things in history. So, that is just appalling and it's immoral, and that's why I keep mentioning veganism, because it's a moral imperative. Now, I know I'm meandering around as I tend to do, and I said that I would try and address that, but I mean, these are all related. The heat and the humidity, the places that are going to be untenable to live, places that will all be going underwater. But, think about the plant agriculture. When it's too hot, plants cannot survive, and there are crops failing all over the place. But we can try and do what we can, and we can't rely on corporations to do anything because they're beholden to their shareholders. They're also, they don't care. They will keep using up the planet until it's completely finished. But we can do something, and that means go vegan. We can try and reduce our consumption as much as we can. We can try and, do all the things that are suggested. I'm not going to go through it, but do all the things that are suggested, that is, to sort of address this situation. And, we can't rely on politicians to do what's right. So there needs to be a grassroots movement. That's why nonviolent civil disobedience is great, but we also need grassroots movements because there's more of us than there are of them. I fear for Australia that in 5 years' time, there's going to be so many places here that will be untenable for living. And we're just a little, quote-unquote canary in the coal mine sort of thing for the rest of the planet. What you see happening here is coming to your continent soon, if it isn't already there. So there are things that we can do. I don't believe that we can stop what's coming now, and I've said that before, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not into the hopium thing. I don't want I don't want to be treated like a child. I don't want people to be not telling me things because they think I can't cope or that it's going to cause panic. People are going to panic at some point, and plant agriculture fails, which it's doing already. It's on the brink already. They're going to, if we think that COVID-19 it gives us a little glimpse into the future of how people are going to behave when things start drying up, when there's certain resources aren't easily available, and people will be panicking, and it's going to be a social breakdown situation. So this gives you a little idea of what will happen in the future when agriculture starts to fail majorly, and then there starts to be food shortages and people start starving. There are people already in the world that are starving. Do we care? No, because they're brown and black people. So, it's because they haven't managed things properly. No, it's often because it's U.S. meddling, U.S. imperialism with Western allies going along with it and allowing corporations to mess up what's already there and installing dictators and who do whatever the bidding of the corporate-owned U.S. empire wants them to do. I mean, we've done a lot of things wrong around the globe. The West has a lot to answer for in our white supremacist endeavors. That's all I wanted to say. There's probably more I could say, but I'll be chatting with Dee Dee River later, hopefully in the next 2 or 3 days, and we're going to talk about Planet of the Humans, and Dee Dee has a lot of knowledge about environmental issues. Her background is that, amongst other things, and amongst many other things, and so she'll have some interesting insights, so I hope you will check that out when I post it. So thanks for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notifications bell, otherwise you won't receive notifications when I drop a video. Thanks for watching. Till next time, be safe, go vegan, bye for now.